everyone. My name is Christian Ramirez. I'm the Public Programs Manager at Phoenix Art Museum, and thank you so much for joining us this evening. It's my pleasure to introduce one of the 2019 Phoenix Art Museum Artist Grant Recipients, Nazafarin Lotfi, and artist Maryam, sorry, I got distracted. I'm so sorry. And artist Maryam Hoseini. Tonight, they'll be in conversation around their artistic practices and recurring themes that connect their work. Before we begin, I just wanted to share the format for this evening. Nazafarin and Maryam will be in dialogue for most of the program, but we will be taking questions at the end. So if there's anything that you'd like them to expand upon or any questions that kind of come up for you, please feel free to drop those in the chat or through the Q&A feature. I'll be monitoring those and send them over to them at the end. I'd also like to take a moment to thank our museum members for their continued support and give a special thanks to the William Randolph Hearst Endowed Fund for Education Programs for generally supporting educational events and programs at Phoenix Art Museum. I'd also like to note that the 2019 Phoenix Art Museum Artist Grants Recipient Exhibition is currently on view until September 5th. So hopefully you can come to the museum and see the work that we'll be talking about tonight in person. So with all of that kind of housekeeping out of the way, I'd like to introduce tonight's speakers. Nazafarin Lotfi explores the spatial and temporal experiences of bodies out of place. She combines drawing, painting, and sculpture to create transitory spaces which unfold between dimensions, often contradicting themselves. She has shown extensively, including exhibitions at Artpace in San Antonio, Texas, the Tucson Museum of Art in Tucson, Regards in Chicago, Illinois, and his various other places. Maryam Hoseini explores the relationship between bodies, physical space, and the politics of narrative. Her work utilizes paintings and site-specific installations to investigate the political, social, and personal conditions of identity and gender while examining the concepts of ruins, displacement, and fracture. Hoseini earned dual MFA degrees from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago and Bard College. The artist has participated in exhibitions at the New Museum in New York, MoMA PS1, the Arts Club in London, Rachel Offner Gallery, and Green Art Galleries, among others. So thank you all for being here. I'm going to pass it over to them and enjoy.
Thank you, Christian, for the introduction. And thank you, Maryam, for being here and talking with me about
Thanks for my work. Yeah, of course. Well, let's jump into our conversation, the work. And maybe we can start with how we met. What do you think?
That's good. Yeah.
Or like, yeah.
Yeah, I remember we met in Chicago. You came to Chicago. I was already living in Chicago, and we went to the same program, painting department at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. So our relationship sort of deals around the city and painting, and also coming from the same country and having some mutual friends.
Yeah. And you had graduated like some years before me, right?
Yeah.
So we both were.
I was teaching when you got there. Yeah.
Totally. But yeah, painting. You said that well. But I guess like, where did we get from painting? You know, like we both went to the painting. I mean, like I did go to school for painting, and then I think we both kind of like fought with the painting in different ways, and what our works are now, or like what we started like going from painting, and somehow like yeah, there's this extension of painting, you know, that turned to be like, or like extension of the medium. Does that make sense? Like, I mean, yeah, yeah, maybe we can go like to slide like of your show. And because I said the extension of painting, you know, or the medium. And somehow I kind of want to just say like, do you think where does this extension, you know, start? Like we kind of like, are these like, I mean, in your work and in mine, like, are they like painted sculptures, or like, are they like sculpture, sculptural painting. You know, there are like names for this kind of a, or like there is this kind of the language to describe the work. You know, are they sculpture or are they like painted sculpture? And to put them in some sort of category. And in that sense, there's this extension of the medium, you know, and I do think, where does that extension like come from or start for you?
Oh, that's a very good question. I think I stopped making paintings on canvas a few years after I got out of grad school. But
after grad,
yeah, but I was already in grad school, and that's like 10 years ago. I was making sculptures, basically like mock-ups with cardboard, with paper.
When you were at the school.
Yeah. So I always I was very interested in like moving between 2D and 3D, but it became very intentional as I made more work, that the frame of the painting just wasn't enough. The border wasn't enough. And there was this thing about expanding into the real space, into the living space. And I was very interested in the idea of making things that I could hold initially. And I started working with paper mache because it was the cheapest and easiest way, basically, for me to make objects that could stand on their own. They didn't necessarily need to be on the wall. They could be things in the room. And I mean, looking at the image in front of us, I mean, this is an installation from this exhibition at the Phoenix Art Museum. These objects, my sculptures basically really like, I call them very comfortably sculptures. That's funny.
Yeah.
But I mean, they're really like they're painted surfaces.
That's what I was like saying, like painted sculptures. But also funny enough that we both kind of we have started with painting, you know, and then like expanded the painting or breaking the frame to get to this space, which I think we have talked a lot about that in multiple, you know, ways or times, about how we are trying to create a space. And maybe that's like in both like conceptually and materially, you know, it's like both in terms of the identity of the work and self, you know, like trying to create space for ourselves and the work, or making a new relationship to this space. But funny enough that I think every time we have talked, it's like we're both like, well, we consider ourselves as drawers. We're not even painter or sculptor, you know. So
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, as much as we do talk about, is this painting or is it a sculpture? And that question comes from a very intentional place of not placing oneself in within this one discipline, right? Or one category. But also at the end, it's like, no, it's none of them. And these are drawings. They're just expanded or exploded drawings, three-dimensional drawings. But you said something about the identity of the work, that like there's that confusion about what is this thing that I'm looking at, like in terms of the discipline and also in terms of the form, right? That they're not like completely like clear that what they are. Are they like figures? Are they geological forms? Are they just things? They can be all of them and they can be none of them. But that also, I think that ambiguity, I think, relates to that, like defying to fit in one discipline or canon within the art history.
Exactly.
And I also wanted to add that because we've talked so much, and like I think about that as an extension of my own identity, right? That like not like wanting to like summarize everything in 30 seconds, you know, like not wanting to brand yourself in like, this is it, this is what I am, this is who I am, or this is the thing you're looking at, but actually like pausing and slowing down, or creating a puzzling situation.
Yeah, I think that's a better way to say how we actually like we got connected. I think the most of our conversation, they have been like always like around this, you know, refusal to adaptation to one thing, you know, yeah. uh, the other thing is that like when we say like we have talked so much, like we are like physically we're so far from each other. I'm in New York and Nazafarin in Tucson, and but hours of always talking on the phone results on this. So, but what you were saying about like the work that we're like looking at it, and I was gonna, oh, we're getting to let's, yeah, the expansion, like let's just like here. And I think you said that very well in terms of like breaking the frame and like the frame not being enough. Or I think like for me it's also like, you know, in painting and figure ground, and there is this frame, there's this space to work with, you know, and I always want to go beyond that, like looking for another ground, which I think we can talk about that. But I was, when we were looking at the previous slide, if you can go back to that, I was gonna like, they look very heavy, you know, like you were saying like about this contradiction or like the refusal of to be one thing or the other. And I think that's like a very interesting thing about your work, is that like they look like, you said they are paper mache. Well, when I'm looking at it, you know, from afar, from distance, they look very heavy, grounded, like there's like a gravity, they're sitting somewhere, you know. And you were just saying, are they bodies, you know, are they they're bended bodies, it's stone, it's like something, you know, it's like a yeah, stack of something, you know, you put it on the ground. And I think like in yeah, and there is some, I think anyway, I always get distracted by the chat, you know, when I'm on the Zoom. But anyways, yeah, so I think they can be multiple things, a lot of things. And but when you get close to them, there's this like, they're very hollow, and it's like, how do you say about these differences, you know, like you give something from they appear different from the distance, and then you get close and you have totally different reality, which I think like that's how I feel in my work too. But I kind of want you to, if you can expand on it. Yeah.
Some of the objects are open, so when you get up close you see that they're hollow, and then and also like when you get up close to them you see the lines because they're drawn surfaces. Again, there's like graphite or colored pencil, so then you realize that this is a surface that actually can be drawn on, so it's not metal or it's not rock. So it sort of like demystifies in a way that like the materiality sort of shows itself, it reveals in a way. But that, I think that is very interesting to me, to make things that at once have like different qualities, you know, like they're heavy and light at the same time. They are about material, but also immateriality at the same time because they are shells. So that is a very exciting place, which I think I do that in my drawings as well. When we like later look at, like I included a couple of drawings here too, that like condition of when you try to describe it, it nullifies itself, it negates itself, right? Like you're describing something very heavy, as you move on and you move on and you move on, you say more and say more, and then it becomes like the opposite of where you started. So and that's very interesting to me, to like make things that work with that complexity or contradiction. And also the other thing that also I've been thinking a lot about, that I act on ideas or notes that I have in my sketchbook or whatever. I act on things when there are multiple ways of approaching that thing. For example, like I wanted to make these larger scale bodies, sculptural forms, thinking about bodies, like and when I talk about body in this context, it's really presence, like not a specific body, but more initially when I was thinking about that, it was a presence. I wanted someone with me. I wanted to have a presence in my studio, like at the beginning of starting to like expanding with the scale of the work. And I was hiking at the same time a lot. I was exposed to the desert, the mountains. So the mountains are very sculptural. They're figures and also they're ground. So that, like you were talking about figure ground a little bit ago. I kept thinking about mountains, that they're a thing from a distance, but when you get up close to, I mean, when you're on them, then it becomes the ground. So that shift was very interesting. And then I was thinking about the mountain, the rock, as a body, as a presence. Then it became interesting. Then I started, okay, so I can make things that can be the ground, can look like the surface of the earth, but also they could embody a sense of presence, like a shrouded thing, something that is being squeezed under, or is like folding inside, you know, or like is sitting somewhere. Not like necessarily a monumental hero figure, but like the opposite of that, an anti-hero, an anti-monumental presence. But it was only like when I figured out that I was interested in multiple things, bringing them together, multiple different things, then I acted on making them.
Right. Yeah, I mean, like that's what, yeah, like there are like you when you're talking, they're like, it's a space of negation. They're like negating themselves. And what you were describing about the mountain, that was like very interesting too. Like then like this presence then become the ground itself. Yeah. And the other thing was like
here. Because I think this is like the experience of looking at something from a distance, and then when you get up close, I think is very present with your work. And I think the piece on the right is a good example of that.
Yeah, and also like there are I think that's one of the shared spaces between our work, is like how we are like dealing with this like dualities or contradiction, like refusal to be either or, you know, like it's like either or, that doesn't mean anything. It's like they're like constantly in removing and bringing something, pushing and pulling something from the space and putting it back. And I think in this work is like and the one that you were like mentioning, the one on the right, I feel the same. Like, you know, when you're from afar, you think you perceived it as this like big dimensional spatial piece, and then you get close, and in my work there are a lot of details, you know, like what you were saying about drawing on the surface of, you know, your sculptures, or like just generally making drawing. And I think the form and even like painting for me, it's like all of it is about drawing, you know, drawing a form and creating that. And then there are a lot of drawings on the work, and I really want that this two different ways of approaching the work, you know, having this experience from the stance, and then getting close, and the surprise, the moment of revealing a lot of like delicate moments, or like even, yeah. So I think that happens. And also like I think with suspension and gravity and grounding, like I think like these works are on the ground, or the either started from the ground or expanded to the ground, and you have this like, you're sitting there, and there is this defying the gravity. But on the other side, I think the imagery, what happens in the work is like very a lot of times are like in suspension, they're floating in this non-space. I think like that's where the matter of a space is so important. I think like in the picture plane and in the physicality of the work for me, you know. Yeah, and I think like there's that, yeah.
And the negative space, you know, with the piece on the left, I think that is something I think a lot about, to incorporate, to like reverse the negative space and positive space, right? Like, which I think that also speaks to your relationship to figure ground, right? That reversible relationship, and negative space is something that you use a lot in your work. Like a lot of times the fragments are removed and then you're dealing with what is behind, then that becomes the figure.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, I always think about their relationship to this space, to my own body, you know, like when I'm making it, like what you were saying, that the work becomes not necessarily specific, like it's not about like what a specific body, or like, you know, it's not about that, it's about just like that physicality, the presence of in the space that you're sharing with the work, like the relationship that you're making, creating with your work, you know. It's like this other presence in your studio, and you're having like just moving it and bending it and throwing it on the ground, and you know, like there is this there's this physical relationship. And I think like when I have these works, I always constantly think about it, like the relationship to the wall, the negative space with it, and then with myself, you know. And kind of the other thing about this work is that they are puzzled, you know, they're not like one shaped piece, they're interlocked together. And I think that is something that is so important for me, to separate and then put them back together. And a lot of times I'm just like changing it with another piece. So I think that process of sculpting and then painting, which is like at the end, I feel like it's more like drawing the structure and everything together. But I think that that is something that was like common with your work, you know. Yeah, to
that idea of
the surface,
and constructing space.
Yeah.
When so I haven't seen these in person because of the pandemic. You had all this show at the beginning of the pandemic and we couldn't travel, which was very unfortunate. But I mean, looking at the images, like we talked about this, that when I first like looked at the images of the new work, the first thing that came to my mind was like these things, like these objects, like just from a digital reproduction of the piece, that there is a very like, they're very present, they're very big, and they seem very like stubbornly like claiming their place in the room, in the gallery, right? They're refusing to go back like close to the wall. They want to be like a foot or two into the gallery. And I like that, because when you talked about them in a very different way, you were talking about like they're suspended worlds, right? And then I was like, yeah, when I look inside, I see that, like I get that. But there is that thing, there is that shift between what it appears from a distance, then it's like completely other reality inside it, that that makes it like, that asks you to get up close and explore the piece, or look into the piece. And these are like the things that I think a lot about too, to like create texture, or leave enough residues of touch on the surfaces to ask for a closer look, right? To look into the thing versus looking at the thing, at the work.
Yeah, I like what you were saying about like refusing to be put in their place. And I think about them as like protesting bodies. So I saw them in line, you know, or like the act of like verticality, the fact that you are like facing this like frontal relationship. I think there is like violence in that, you know, and the like something that is like standing in front of you, you know, and it's like refuse, because there is a pole putting it you know, like away from the wall. And I think that was like a moment I was smiling. I was like, yeah, I'm thinking about them as protesting bodies. But what you were saying after that?
I don't know. I was talking about that tension between like when the close examination versus
Yeah.
a distant, that experience of near and far, basically, which I know you think about that.
Yeah.
And I think that it speaks to like the level of abstraction, right? And like your figures are not like, you don't know who they are.
Yeah.
They don't have necessarily a face, right? To tell you like who is this body. I want to go to maybe a close-up of yours. Let's go back here.
Oh, yeah.
For example.
Yeah,
That, you know, like we don't know the identity of these figures.
Which I think we were like talking about, like, you know, when it was that essays of Gordon Hall that we were talking about it, you know, and we kind of both were so interested in this conversation about the bodies. Like when you say, like, when you're like seeing the bodies, like whose body, you know, and there's always so much pressure, you know, to define, to have like a category for it, you know, like a female bodies or like transgender bodies, or, you know, like there are all these like names for it. And I think like, or like where are they from? And I mean, like, I think I remember you were like reading a line for me, like the bodies of difference. You were like reading that, and I really like that, you know, instead of saying like whose body or what kind of body. I like when you're saying that, like the bodies of difference. And yeah.
Can we jump into shadows? You use a lot of shadows, so your figures, although they're very flat, but obviously they cast some sort of shadows. That's another contradictory element. But you
think the audience is gonna be like, why these two are keep contradicting it? I mean, like that's who we are, I think. But yeah, in terms of the shadows, I think like yeah, I mean, for me, like to deal with the shadows is like I think we were like talking about that in relation to your work too, to talk about the one that doesn't exist or hasn't come, you know, or the thing that is in memory, you know, or you kind of called my work this space of like working with the shadow, and then these bodies that they multiply, but then they are the shadow of one, you know, and you were like, they're just this placeless spaces, you know, and you were like talking about your work in relation, because you work, I think the shadow is going to be like a big topic for us to talk. I mean, I think in repetition, in rotation, let's go to some of drawings that maybe, was it like these drawings that you had, maybe the blue ones,
of the sculptures, the shadows on the surfaces.
Yeah.
So like this is one, like the mark on the surface of this piece is basically the recording of the shadow of another piece, basically casted on this surface. I mean, you talk about the shadow in relationship to the other who is not oneself. Which is very interesting. And I think about shadows, or my interest about shadows comes from the place that the shadows occupy, you know, that this very temporary existence, because I work a lot with the light in my studio. I have windows on two sides, east and west, and then the morning light is very different than the evening light, and then I get all these shadows in the evening by sunset. They're very extreme, and I usually mark or record them on my sculptural surfaces.
Right.
So the piece on the wall is a relief piece, is a sculpted like drawing on a wall piece. So because it's dimensional, the surface casts shadow on itself, or sometimes objects cast shadows on other objects. And I'm very interested in those encounters because they're going to move. As you said, the object rotates in this space, it moves. And recording those movements and rotations are very interesting to me. I think that's like one way for me to connect the object to its physical location and time, you know. And I think because I usually don't work with a lot of representational elements, I'm always looking for these other ways of connecting things to a tangible place, you know, like if it's shadow or if it's texture, you know, it's a particular texture that reminds you of something, or it's a shadow that marks a specific time.
Yeah.
Then the object is grounded in a way, but to a time that is gone.
Can be referred to as like this multiply, like perspectival approach to the work. Like it has, I mean, shadow in relation to perspective. And we were talking about like when I was saying like about rotation and different times of the different times, you know, of the day, or and I think, I mean, these works that are like my most recent work, and actually it has a lot to do with like perspective and the shift in time and how where we are looking at, you know, from where you're looking into a space, you know, and which I think for me, it's, I think when you are like in the space of kind of, for me, when we talk, and the interesting place is that like you really like use the light. You were saying like your space gets light from multiple, you know, angles, and then you use that, and it moves, and the drastic change that happens in different times of the day. But I think for me, it's like that space of the shadow is more imaginary. Like this imaginary space and the fictional relationship that one character can create with the psyche, you know, it's about the psyche of like the relationship that one character can create, you know, or like one, like the figure can create with their shadow, you know. And I think that's one thing, but I think in this work also the aperture that is in the middle, like it's the place that from this aperture the perspectival changes, like it's like multiple kind of perspectival approach in this work, like as if one is looking from above, from right, from left. I mean, the picture is from right now, it's like too far that you can't even see the details and what I'm saying in terms of this spatial change, you know, that happens. But and that's another thing that we talked about, you know, when looking the work from the distance. And but anyway, I think like that's like something in the work that I think was so important for me, and that has to do with like representation also, you know, like how things can shift based on from where you're looking at, you know, and the like, for example, the public perception, like in representation, public perception versus the private or personal, you know. And so that became, I think, like this is, I mean, such a big space to enter. So I think, but that's about like looking from what angle, from where, to these places, this like scenarios. But I think just to not talk about this specific work, I mean, this is like, I think, but to maybe move to your drawings, because we talked about perspective and rotation, and yeah, And I think that's literally, that's what happens in this work, you know, the gradual change. And I think maybe you can talk about like how the shapes move around, which I feel very connected and that happens.
Yeah, I think like we do definitely have a similar approach into the constructing these like architectural spaces, which are occupied by these figures. Mine are empty spaces, like spaces, I call them spaces of possibilities. Things can happen there, but things of particular nature, right? Not everything, but things that of the nature that that also embody like the qualities of this particular place. Like this is an example of like when I was telling you that I like to make things that when you describe them, they start negating themselves. And I started this body of drawings like very early on when I moved to Tucson. I just thought like looking back, because this is not what I thought when I started making these, but reflecting on this experience, that the desert was just too much. It was too open. I'm still struggling with aspects of that. Everything is so wide, you know. And a lot of the work that I showed you here and I'm making now is in like really in reflection of this experience, this like being with this other phenomena in this vast open desert, this like southwestern desert. And I started making these floor plans, which were based on the real space of my home, my bedroom, my studio, my kitchen. And I was doing sketches, like little sketches in my notebook, and then go to every time I went to the studio, I would put them together to make a new space, like based on these real spaces, but an imaginative space. That's like,
I think that's
drawn from
the place. Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Drawn from the lived experience of certain spaces, but then when you put them together, they make a place that cannot exist, just like based on like what we know about perception, perspective, or looking, like the way we see things, like these spaces cannot exist, like the way the negative space becomes the positive space, or the perspective that suddenly is like changes, right? It's viewed isometric and linear at the same time. So they're like impossibilities within this viewpoint, right? And that's what I mean when I said like they nullify themselves. The more like you try to explain, oh, I'm looking from the side, or no, maybe I'm looking from above, or oh no, maybe I'm looking through the window. And then it becomes less of a puzzle, but more of a place that maybe not necessarily cannot exist, right? So that's, and I mean, that is like, I think is in a dialogue with like thinking about the shadow, right? What kind of space shadows occupy, right? Like, what does it mean to like have shadows of things while the things are removed? You know, they're like very particular kind of spaces that are very interesting to me. And I wanted to talk about before, like we moved too far away from what you were saying about your relationship with shadows and your figures, your imaginary figures, basically, which are a lot of times hybrid of like other beings combined with human figures, right? Fantastical sometimes. So there's this relationship between self and other when the figure is casting multiple shadows or a shadow, right? Their shadow is casted on the surface. I was thinking about that in relationship to something we had talked about once a while ago, about both of us, we became immigrants at a later age when we were in our mid-20s, you know, and we were like adults, and we remember the transition and this process of becoming other to oneself.
Right.
Then you are like, you use an interesting phrase that you said, this experience of being under a microscope, right? Which I hadn't thought about it, but it's really true that like you like suddenly become other to yourself. You know, when you come from, like, particularly for us, coming from a country that is not very known in this country, right? Like, and there is this hostile relationship between the two, and you navigate that. Then I think like that is where our bodies become this like map of this connection between these two complicated places, right?
Mhm.
But I was thinking about that, like the relationship between self and other in relationship to our lived experience of like becoming other to oneself, because you just simply like relocated, uprooted from one culture, one language, one time zone to another one. And then you're forming and becoming this new person.
Totally. And yeah, and then you constantly have this relationship built, and then you kind of the space of memory also, you know, like you constantly go in search of you know, like what it was, or like the funny thing, we were like talking about like how when we immigrated like here, like what we learned the most was about ourselves, you know, or like the culture that we are coming from, because there is all of a sudden this like big expectation of defining, you know, defining self. And I think then what you were saying, you become other to yourself, you know, and you have to learn so much about like, I think I learned so much about my own culture when I, you know, moved here. And I think that's like a mutual thing. I think we got a message from Christian.
Yes, I'm not trying to like, I just wanted to note the time. This is really like great to hear from both of you though about your work. It's been super fascinating. But I just wanted to kind of offer the last kind of 5-10 minutes of the program to see if anyone from the audience had any questions that they'd like to ask, or if there's any final thoughts that either one of you two had. I guess I don't have like a fully formed question, but it's more of just a lot of what you were talking about, Nazafarin, about like grappling with the bigness of the desert, but then still creating these sculptures because you wanted a physical object in your studio. So it's just like kind of this interesting contrast, which I know that's a lot of what you two have been going back and forth about, is the like contradictions within your own work.
Ourselves.
Yeah, that like it's too big, but you're still like, maybe it's a way of processing, making the bigness more obtainable. But just like, yeah, kind of if you thought anything about that. It's not like a great question, I'm so sorry, but like I'm just still trying to piece together some of the stuff that you both have been saying.
No, I think this macro micro relationship is something that is definitely happening in my studio, and also like commenting on Maryam was saying that like at this point, like we realized that we've learned so much more about ourselves because we relocated, we came to this country basically, and people just don't know anything about our culture. So I mean, for me, it was like hearing so many absurd comments that made me like, oh, I don't think that's right, you know, like let's look into this. But going back to what you were talking about, Christian, so my current work deals a lot with the enclosed landscape of gardens. And that is the other, I just wanted to add that to like this relationship between macro, the horizon, this vastness, this wilderness that this American Southwest, I became like gradually like thinking about how one represents this place, right? How or like thinking about the history of representation of this particular landscape. I became gradually and navigated toward thinking about enclosed landscapes and thinking about how in my culture, nature has been represented and talked about in poetry and in literature. And that's like the place I look for my facts, information. I look at poetry and literature to like, as like knowledge, to like find knowledge about something. And I've been thinking about the garden, the space, the interior space of the garden, which I think it is in dialogue with the interior spaces that I was making when I first got here from my home, my studio. But then it gradually like left the interior of the building to the outside, but it is still a constructed outside, you know, so this is still contained. yeah, and I think like that is like sort of the place I am in, right?
Mhm.
It's like I'm here trying to find my place. Like I'm an Iranian immigrant in Arizona, in southern Arizona, with really no connection to this place,
Mhm.
randomly put here. And now like trying to make sense of what that means, right?
Mhm.
And what are the forms of connecting to this particular land.
Mhm. Which is actually kind of leads in really well to a question that we have from an audience member asking if you could speak a little bit about leaving open areas in the sculptures that you make versus closed forms altogether.
To speak about so most of my sculptures have openings basically that you can look into them, and that is very interesting to me, to like open up the interior of the sculpture to the space of the exterior, to like allow for interaction between the interior and exterior. And that is mainly like the exploration comes from that. And but sometimes you don't notice the opening until you walk around them. It's like you have to like explore them. You go inside, you have to like bend to be able to see, oh, it's open, you know. But the two of the pieces at that I showed are not open. Actually, they're enclosed. They're closed.
Awesome. And then the other question was, which you already talked a little bit about it, Nazafarin, but maybe Maryam, if you'd like to touch on what you are working on right now.
I think it's like, yeah, I was like just thinking about, like you said, like two of them are closed. And I think that is that relationship that the relationship that you were talking earlier about, like with this other presence, and then the place of surprise, and you need to go and find your relationship, the relationship of the viewer's body with the piece. And I think in that kind of makes sense in my work too. And so these are like just about like what I'm working on. I think this is like the show that currently is up now at New Museum. And I think there are a continuation of this project happening. I think, which has a lot. I mean, I think like, wow, I need to open this up, this architectural spaces. And I think Nazafarin was talking about the micro, macro, and in the spaces of the garden. And I think like that has to do with this particular projects that I'm working on in terms of like the architectural spaces that they are controlling, like the private versus the public, you know. And the private is dedicated to certain kind of like kind of existence or gender, and then and the public for the other. And I think that the power of architecture is something that I'm like kind of in my current projects coming through. And this when I say the power of architecture, there's this medieval like term related to like medieval, used in architectural spaces for medieval castles. It's called arrow slit, and that's the place an archer would through an arrow, you know. And I think when I was saying the power of architecture is like to control, to have access, and that has to do with the representational aspects of like, you know, who's looking, this voyeuristic aspects of like who's looking through this apertures, through these spaces to control, or like who belongs to the private and public, you know, of the spaces. So I think yeah, and that's like a continuous project that I have been working on. And it's kind of yeah, I think it's when I start talking about it, it becomes so many layers. And what I think that's what we were both like talking about, like the complexities, and what Nazafarin was saying about poetry, you know, the place of poetry. And I think we're both interested in this, like the complexity in poetry. That's something that the line that we're reading, but there is so much rhythm and order and into the poetry. And I think that's where we start our work, in these layers that hopefully they meet in a place that has rhythm. Yeah.
Yes, complex simplicity. That's
That's what you were.
That's a perfect way to sum it up.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, I think that's a great place to leave it, unless there's any other questions or anything else that either one of you would like to share. But yeah, this was great. Thank you so much for your time, for being here. We just got a question about the recording. Yes, we will upload it to our YouTube page in a week or so. So keep an eye out for that. But please come to the museum if you're able to, if you're in Phoenix, to come see the exhibition. And you can kind of, yeah, I think part of what I love so much about your work, Nazafarin, is being able to walk through it. Like and at the very beginning, Maryam, you mentioned that the figures felt like happy. And I think I project a lot of my own feelings onto them depending on where I'm at in the day. Like sometimes they are very joyous, but other times they kind of like make me sad or like scared, or it depends on the mood of the room, really, is how we're able to project ourselves onto them. So hopefully other people will be able to come enjoy them in person. And if you're in New York, come check out her show at the new museum. But have a great evening, and thank you both again for doing this, and for everyone else for being here. Have a good rest of your night.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Kristen.